In the early 6th century BCE, it was just logical for the ministers in Jerusalem to assume that Babylonian rule in Chatuland was weakening. Zedekiah could also evaluate that Egypt can confront with the Babylonian army and assist him in his decision to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar. Egypt's support for the rebellion was a major condition, and indeed, as we already seen, there is clear evidence that the ties between Judah and Egypt were tightened during the time of Zedekiah. It was noticed even by the Judahites that were deported to Babylon together with King Jehoiachin already in 597, and one of them, the prophet Ezekiel, could criticize Zedekiah and warn him. And I read from Ezekiel 17:15. ויקח מזרע המלוכה, ויכרות איתו ברית, ויבא אותו בעלה ואת אלי הארץ לקח, להיות ממלכה שפלה לבלתי יתנסה לשמור את בריתו לעומדה. וימרוד בו לשלוח מלאכיו מצרים, לתת לו סוסים ועם רב, היצלח? הימלט העושה אלה והפר ברית ונמלט? In my opinion, Egypt's retreat in the face of the Babylonian army in the middle of the Babylonian siege on Jerusalem, perhaps even without confronting it, as well as the continued unchallenged control by the Babylonians in the region, are proof that the rebellion against Babylon and the reliance on the Egyptians were a serious miscalculation. The decision reached by the nation's leaders in Jerusalem to continue to revolt even after the retreat by the Egyptian army and the renewal of the Babylonian siege on Jerusalem are proof that additional, stronger factors were at work in reaching the decision to rebel. These factors were social and political, and in particular, ideological, theological reasons that led the leaders of Judah to persist in the rebellion against Babylon until its final surrender and destruction. As I described already in the introduction to this part of the course, the echoes of Sennacherib's campaign and the remembered rescue of Jerusalem from the Assyrians were interpreted several generations later as definitive proof of the manifestation of God's power in the world and produced feeling of a total security that God would protect his city. Among the military, political, and religious leadership in Jerusalem, there was a prevailing belief that Jerusalem would continue to exist peacefully and would never fall to an enemy and oppressor. This perception led to a relaxation of some of the restraints that had characterized the leadership of the small kingdom throughout most of its life, and which enabled a large degree of political, religious, and diplomatic freedom, specifically at the time when caution was essential. Jeremiah's attempt to combat this perception and his call to do not put your trust in the words of the lie and keep saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these, in Jeremiah 7:4, is one of the indications for the centrality of this idea on the eve of the destruction of Jerusalem. It is probable that Zedekiah was influenced also by the activist circle that took action in Jerusalem and the groups of prophets who pushed for rebellion against Babylon. A description of the events that took place in the last year of the Judean kingdom reveals the resonance of the religious nationalistic fanaticism that was prevalent in Jerusalem. The central role of the officials that believed that nothing will happen to Jerusalem no matter what they will do, and the prophets, which according to Jeremiah are false prophets, together with the weakness of King Zedekiah, are expressed mainly in the prophecies of Jeremiah and in the stories about this prophet during the Babylonian siege in chapter 37 and 38. A striking example of this is found in Jeremiah's words in chapter 27, verse 9. He is talking against, and I will quote from his prophecies, he's talking against, ואתם אל תשמעו אל נביאיכם, ואל קוסמיכם, ואל חלומותיכם, ואל עונניכם, ואל כשפיכם, אשר הם אומרים אליכם לאמור, לא תעבדו את מלך בבל. In verse 16, he is warning against the prophets. ואל הכהנים, ואל כל העם הזה דיברתי לאמור, כה אמר אדוני, אל תשמעו אל דברי נביאיכם הניבאים לכם לאמור, הנה כלי בית אדוני מושבים מבבל לה עתה מהרה, כי שקר המה ניבאים לכם. This is also reflected in the clash between Jeremiah and Hananiah, the son of Azur, the prophet from Gibeon in the land of Benjamin, in Jeremiah chapter 28. His symbolic act, as described in verses 1 to 4, seems very convincing, and this is only a short time after Jeremiah had appeared before the representatives of the kings of Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon with tongues and a yoke bar upon his neck and claimed, אנוכי עשיתי את הארץ, את האדם ואת הבהמה אשר על פני הארץ, בכוחי הגדול ובזרועי הנטויה, ונתתיה לאשר ישר בעיניי. ועתה, אנוכי נתתי את כל הארצות האלה ביד נבוכדנצר מלך בבל עבדי, וגם את חיית השדה נתתי לו לעבדו. ועבדו אותו כל הגויים ואת בנו ואת בן בנו, עד בו את ארצו גם הוא, ועבדו בו גויים רבים ומלכים גדולים. According to Jeremiah 28 verse 10, Hananiah took the yoke bar from Jeremiah's neck and broke it. He encouraged those present to revolt against Babylon, and according to verses 2 to 4 in chapter 28, he claimed that, כה אמר אדוני צבאות אלוהי ישראל לאמור, שברתי את עול מלך בבל, בעוד 2 ימים אני משיב אל המקום הזה את כל כלי בית אדוני אשר לקח נבוכדנצר מלך בבל מן המקום הזה, ויביאם בבלה. ואת יחניה בן יהויקים מלך יהודה, ואת כל גלות יהודה הבאים בבלה, אני משיב אל המקום הזה נאום אדוני, כי אשבור את עול מלך בבל. Prophets were also active among the exiles to Babylon, calling for the breaking of the Babylonian yoke, and Jeremiah acted against them as well, stating that they are false prophets and they are saying false words. In Jeremiah 29, verse 8 to 9, he is saying, כי כה אמר אדוני צבאות אלוהי ישראל, אל ישיעו לכם נביאיכם אשר בקרבכם וקוסמיכם, ואל תשמעו אל חלומותיכם אשר אתם מחלמים, כי בשקר הם ניבאים לכם בשמי, לא שלחתים נאום אדוני. Jeremiah even notes the names of 2 prophets, Ahab the son of Koliah and Zedekiah the son of Maaseiah, whom the king of Babylon roasted in fire, after they had prophesied what he interpreted as false words. And you can check me in Jeremiah 29 verses 21 to 23. Who could decide in this stage who is the real prophet delivering the message of the God of Israel and who is the false prophet? And how to react? Should the people accept and agree with the Babylonian yoke or resist it? Only after the destruction of Jerusalem it became clear that the rebellion against Babylon was wrong, that Jerusalem could have been destroyed, that the protection of God on his city was not unconditioned, and that Jeremiah presented the right way. The people should have obeyed. But it was too late. According to the story in Jeremiah 38 verse 15, even at the eve of the destruction of Jerusalem, the prophet could say to the king Zedekiah, "V'chi i'atzcha lo tishma elai," and he could repeat few times the statement that "V'ha'am hazeh lo sham'u elai." From all these accounts, my conclusion is that in the last days of Judah, before and during the revolt against Babylon, there was a strong religious belief among large parts of the nation's elite in God's protection over the city. This belief overcame military and political considerations and fear of Babylonian power and determination. Already in his 1959 book on the history of Israel, Bright described this nationalistic atmosphere on the eve of the revolt against Babylon as theological madness. Many scholars followed him, and it seems also to me that this is a justified definition. Coming back to what we actually know about the events at the eve of the rebellion against Babylon. Do we have any indication for other vassal kingdoms who joined Judah in this revolt? Well, apart from scant information about Tyre and Ammon, nothing is known of additional kingdoms that took part in the anti-Babylonian pact. In the vision of Ezekiel, in chapter 21, verses 23 to 28, there is a description of how difficult it was for the king of Babylon to decide whether to attack Jerusalem or Rabbah of the Ammonites. Is it enough for us to include Ammon in the revolt during this time? Maybe we can add to it an event that we will describe in the next part concerning the support of Baalis, king of Ammon, for Ishmael, the son of Netaniah from the Davidic family, for the conspiracy to assassinate Gedaliah, the son of Achikam, and this we know from Jeremiah 40, verse 14, and from chapter 41, verse 15. Can it be used to show Baalis' political stance? Can we assume that Tyre took its place in the revolt alongside Ammon because of the clues we have on a siege against it that had taken place immediately after the conquest of Jerusalem? You can see that the unknown is greater than what we know concerning this period, and in any event, neither of these kingdoms had any significant military ability that could have threatened the Babylonian army. Ammon was a small, weak kingdom, and Tyre's military strength was at the sea. This joined with Judah, whose military might had been crippled with the deportation of Jehoiachin, and it is doubtful that Judah was truly prepared for the impending Babylonian campaign. Well, this is what I can tell you about the causes of Zedekiah to rebel. It's not much, but this is what we have in our sources. Now, we can move to the historical reconstruction of the actual history of the fall of Jerusalem. We'll do it in the next unit, and I can recommend you to bring your Bibles because we are going to read a lot from this book. See you in the next unit.